Today's presenter, Dax DeFranco, he is homebrewing novice, so he's going to tell us more about that. I mean, how to make beers and how to brew. So let's give him a big hand.
Hi everyone. Thank you for coming today. Before I start, if you have any questions, please write them down on the slips of paper that you're given, and then I'll answer all the questions at the end. Okay? So to start, I started brewing in Korea about a year and a half ago. Like a lot of people who came from abroad or who have visited abroad, Korean beer is occasionally kind of lacking in taste or diversity of any kind. So I was drinking Height and Cass and stuff like that with my friends, and I kind of thought like, oh, okay, Korean beer is nice, but I miss the things from when I used to live in the States. Different hoppy beers or stouts or different things like that. Excuse me. And one day I was on Craigslist, which is sort of a community website, and I found an ad for someone who had been homebrewing and was willing to teach you how to make it. So I thought, oh, that sounds kind of interesting. So I went over, I visited him, I signed up, and that was in May 2009, I think, and I've been making beer ever since. So it's a really nice hobby to have, and it's something that's really exploded recently. So people have been brewing, all through history, but homebrewing has really taken off in the past few years. In Korea, it's a little more difficult than some other places. The equipment is kind of difficult to get. The ingredients are kind of difficult to get. So it's kind of scary to get into it to start. But because it's a little bit difficult, it kind of attracts people who are a little bit weird or eccentric. People who make their own equipment or people who will go the extra mile to make their own things. So it kind of leads to interesting brewers and also more interesting beers. So that's what I hope to talk about today. Okay, so we're going to start out with some misconceptions about making beer, and there's a lot of confusion about homebrewing. So the first one is, can you actually make beer? And yes, you can. All through history, and especially in Europe, for the past 600 or longer years, brewing was something that was just part of the housework. People couldn't drink the water, so people made beer to be able to have something clean to drink. It was just something that you did, something that was the same as cooking or cleaning or killing rats or anything like that. It was just something that every house had to do. So you had to make beer. The way that they made it would probably terrify homebrewers today. The standards of cleanliness and all the things like that were probably really atrocious compared to what we have today. But in the late 60s, people really got into it again, especially from a guy called Charlie Papazian. Excuse me. And he kind of kickstarted the homebrewing revolution again and got people really interested in brewing. Another big one is if you make a mistake, you can go blind or you'll die or something like that. It can't happen. It won't happen. Generally, beer is safer than water in a lot of cases. And like I said, in Europe, people were making beer for a long time because it was safe, because they couldn't drink the water. It is true that you can go blind from moonshine, which was a distilled alcoholic beverage. You can't actually go blind straight from anything distilled. The reason that things like that happened was because during Prohibition in the United States, people who were illegally making alcohol added different things like methyl alcohol or other kinds of things to try to stretch their production. And a lot of times this had poison in it, or there was different reasons, additives or things like that, when mixed together caused a lot of different bad reactions. So it's actually impossible to go blind from beer, or any kind of reactions like that. Excuse me, any kind of reactions like that. In some cases, if you drink really heavily spoiled beer, probably the worst thing that could happen is you'd get some diarrhea or something like that. But if you smelled it, if you put beer that was that bad to your lips, you would probably want to throw up. So it would never be a case. There would never be an issue. Another thing that can happen is sometimes if you're very adventurous or have friends who are very adventurous, if they put some sort of herbal additive in their beer, like, for example, St. John's wort is something that's very, very famous. That can have a lot of really bad reactions with, for example, antibiotics, antidepressants, antiviral medications, and even some birth control medications can have really severe reactions from things like that. So if you actively put poison in your beer or things that will react badly to other things in beer, that can happen, but of course that's very rare. So the next one is it's expensive, but it's not. So I'll show you a little bit later a cost breakdown of some of the beers that I've made personally. It's really, really cheap. Outside of Korea, it's even cheaper than it is here. I think in the States, to make an average batch of beer, it's something like $25. So, and that's for about 30 or 40 liters of beer. To get started, it can be a little bit intimidating to buy the equipment and all of the things like that. Maybe you don't know what you're buying. There's a lot of high-end kits that come bundled together. And it seems like, oh, there's so much stuff. I don't really know what I need. I don't know, what I'm doing. And you can spend a lot of money. But to start, you don't really need more than $100. So it's something that is easily attainable by anybody. Another thing is that people who brew will often upgrade piecemeal. So somebody who wants to get a new brew kettle will sell that brew kettle when they get a new one, and you can buy this used equipment on forums or brewing communities, something like that. So you can often get into the brewing community at a very reasonable price. I know a lot of people who build their water who are interested in pH balances and mineral composition and all of these kind of far out things. Something that's really nice about homebrewing is you can sort of be a mad scientist if you want. You can be as interested in the science and the chemistry and the biology of the different components and even down to the metallurgy of the different things that your equipment is built with, how heat exchange works and all things like that. But you don't have to. I had a partner in Seoul that I brewed with, and for a long time he brewed in Canada before he came here. And his brew day generally was he would get a pizza with some friends, he'd get kind of drunk, he'd play some darts. They would boil up an extract kit, which is something that you can make very easily. And their day was just hanging out. Making beer was kind of just a secondary aim. They enjoyed doing it, and they liked having beer, but it wasn't something that they were extremely interested in. However, there's also people who you can get really finicky about all the little tiny aspects. So if you start making beer and you think, oh, this is kind of interesting, I like this, you can keep going. It can be a lifelong hobby and something that you can really sink your teeth into if you like math or chemistry or things like that. But you don't need to. So it's kind of a nice hobby because you could be into it in a lot of different ways, on a lot of different levels. Some states in the United States where brewing is not legal. Like I said, in Europe, it's been something that's so common for so long that legality is not ever an issue. In Korea, it's 100% legal. You can make as much beer as you want for private consumption. There's no issue like that at all. Like I said, there's a few states where it can be an issue in America. And in Korea, there is some issues if you try to sell it. But as far as private consumption and even sharing among friends or giving it to organizations, I know at the there's a fundraiser at the GIC, I believe, for Sungbin Orphanage. Does that sound right? I made some beer and we raffled it off, and that's completely legal. So it's a good way to raise money for different benefits and things like that. And the last one is, it might be terrible, and it might be. The first time I made beer, it was not very good. But when you're making something that rewards you for making it better each progressive time with good beer, it's something that you want to get better at. It's something that is interesting and something that you can, something that has an incentive to get better for you. You'd be surprised how quickly your skills improve, and especially with the community in Korea. There's a lot of information, there's a lot of different people who are really willing to help you. So it's a very easy thing to improve. The first time you make a beer, it's pretty confusing. It can be a little bit intimidating because there's a lot of steps and you have to do them in the right order and everything like that. But it gets much, much easier. And like I said before, the community is really helpful. So the first time I made it, I kind of just did it from this book, which is kind of the more or less the Bible of homebrewing. So this is called How to Brew by John Palmer. And it starts in the beginning with just the most basic things, but it goes through all advanced techniques and lots of different recipes and all kinds of things like that. Different chemistry and all the formulas that you need to do everything. But there was a guy named Charlie Papazian in the 60s who, like I said before, kind of kickstarted the homebrewing movement. And his sort of big tagline is, relax, don't worry, have a homebrew. So he said, whenever you're feeling stressed out, whenever you're worried about making something, just have a beer, don't worry about it. It's something that's very difficult to screw up. So you can make mistakes, and things will still be okay. Something that's nice about brewing is you can put as much time into it as you want, or as little time into it as you want. So like I said before, my friend Dave, he was making extract batches of beer, which is basically, the beer is made for you. It's similar to getting takeout beer. This little bottle that Morpheus is holding is beer that is pre-made. You boil it, you add some hops, you put some yeast in, and it's done. 6 months, maybe 2 months later, it's ready to drink. It's very easy to do. The cost is a little bit higher, but anyone can do it. So you can get one of these bottles and it will be fine. Anyone can make a beer like that. As you progress, you sort of go into all grain, which is a little bit more difficult. There's a little bit more steps involved. But the cost is, you can make something that you like, you can customize it, but you're not really making it from scratch. So it's kind of akin to cooking. So if you really like to cook, you get interested in new ingredients, you want to try to experiment with things. That's what all grain can do. Extract is more like you have some things, like maybe you get a pizza shell and then you put the sauce on it and that's it. Throw it in the oven. But all grain is something that you can, as you get more interested in brewing and as you want to try to make different things, all grain is something that can really allow you to experiment and try new things and be a little bit inventive. The 10 steps of brewing, I kind of put them into sections. So the first two are preparing the ingredients. So this involves mostly making a recipe. If you're doing extracts, the recipe is done for you. If you're doing all grain, you have to get all the grains and do things like that. You have to get your hops, you have to get grains, you have to get all the equipment. And also you have to clean and sanitize all of your equipment, which is very important. Sanitation is probably the most important step in brewing. So yeast is what actually makes the beer, and yeast is just a kind of bacteria. If you allow other bacteria to get in and kind of compete with that yeast, you can make something that's a little funky. So you want to make sure that you kill everything that's not the yeast, and the yeast is the most important. While you're making the beer, there's not really much that you have to do if you're doing extracts. Most of it is already done for you. You will have a kettle. You'll boil everything up together, throw in some hops at the end, and then that's pretty much it. You add the yeast and let it sit. Most of beer making is just waiting. So you put it into a fermenter and just watch it for a month. Then you bottle it later, and that's it. While you're making something with all grain, it's a little bit more complicated. There's a lot of steps, but all of that stuff is available either online or through different books, such as How to Brew or anything like that. So it's not something that you could maybe stumble on yourself, but through community forums and different books and things like that, it's something that anybody can do. At the end, you want to cool the wort. So wort is the sugar water, basically, that you're making that will one day be beer. At the end, you want to cool it, which helps to prevent any extra bacteria from getting in. So while the wort is hot, it's kind of a hotbed for bacteria that can get in and start to grow. At the end, after it's cool, you pitch the yeast, and that's it. So pitching just means literally pitching, throwing the yeast into the bucket. The primary fermentation is what I said before, just waiting. So primary fermentation is basically a month of waiting. Conditioning is more waiting. So beer making is 99% patience and 1% a little bit hard work. At the end, you want to package it, which basically means putting it in a bottle, right? And at the end, dispensing is pouring it out of the bottle and drinking it. So as you get more into beer making, you can look at kegging systems or things like that, which are a little bit expensive, a little bit maybe difficult to set up. But if you're really interested in making beer, it's a really good way to go. Because when you make a maybe 10-gallon batch of beer, filling up 10 gallons worth of little tiny bottles, it's a real pain in the neck. It's not something you want to do. If you can fill up one keg, it's so much easier. The bottom line is, if you can make ramen, you can make beer. Especially with extract batches, which are a really good way to start. All it is adding hot water, boiling it, and waiting. There's not really any steps. One of the most important things to remember is, no matter what kind of beer you're making, you're only making sugar water. Yeast is doing everything else. So something that is really interesting about making beer is, if I made 10 gallons of the exact same beer, the exact same sugar water, split that up into 5 different batches, and added 5 different yeasts, you would get 5 entirely different beers. So maybe one yeast would kind of accentuate hops. One yeast would make the beer a little more malty tasting, so sweeter. One yeast would be very dry. One yeast would make the beer kind of taste a little fruity. So there's lots of different things to do, and it's all yeast. And like Papazian says, the biggest thing to do is just not stress. So when you're making something, just wait it out. There's been a couple times when I've made beer and it seems like it's going to be really terrible. And if you kind of throw it in the cupboard and let it sit for 2 months, it ends up tasting pretty nice. So this is about ingredients and equipment. So one of the difficult things about Korea is just the availability of things to get. In the States, there's literally hundreds of online shops or corner shops where you can buy all the equipment, the malt, the hops, all of the things that you need to make beer. In Korea, it's a little bit more difficult because homebrewing probably got started in the past 5 years, 5 or 10 years. There are some Koreans that make beer, but it kind of all came at once. So foreigners and Koreans all started making beer together. And there was never really any homebrew culture. In the States and in Europe, homebrew culture kind of had a resurgence in the 60s. So there's a lot of stores that cater to it. There's a lot of equipment. There's a lot of used equipment that you can buy. And there's also people who cater to people just starting homebrewing. There's people that cater to advanced homebrewers, and a lot of communities set up. In Korea, it's starting. It's getting off the ground, but it's still in the early stages. So the things that you absolutely need to brew. Excuse me. First is a brew pot. So this is what you will put the sugar water in to boil everything up, to actually make the beer. So this is where the beer goes. Next is a fermenter, and this is where the beer sits while it's fermenting. So you put the sugar water into this, add the yeast, and then it kind of does its thing. So the yeast makes alcohol and carbon dioxide, and this is where it does it. The plastic bucket, is generally what's available in Korea. It's cheaper to import, it's a lot more sturdy, and it's just sort of easier to transport and work with. The other one is called a carboy, and those are made of glass. They're widely available in Europe and America. In Korea, it's kind of difficult to get them because oftentimes they break if you ship them here. In some ways they're superior, but most people would use plastic buckets while fermenting here. That's what I use. And another benefit to that is, if you can see down at the bottom there's this sort of little spigot. So you would use that. You need to have a plastic bucket anyway when you're bottling. So at the end of, when the beer is all finished, you would put the beer into that and sort of do that into the beer bottles. So that's how you would fill them up. So no matter what, you need one of those. If you just have that to ferment and then bottle in, it kind of cuts out a little equipment. So often in Korea, space is sometimes limited. I know the first year I was here, I had a very small apartment, and I know a lot of teachers do. So sometimes you don't want to have a huge stock of equipment because you have no place. The next thing that's absolutely essential is a capper. So this is to just bottle the beer after you have it. So once you have the beer in the bottles, you need to seal it so that the carbon dioxide can't escape and blow beer all over. When you bottle the beer, there's still a little bit of sugar that the yeast hasn't gotten to yet, and it will continue fermenting, and that's actually what makes beer fizzy. Depending on how much sugar, it's called residual sugar, is still left in the beer, the yeast will keep working on that, and since the carbon dioxide that the yeast makes has nowhere to escape, because the bottle is capped, it just stays in the liquid. The next one is sanitizer. So like I mentioned before, sanitation is really important because you want to kill everything that is not the yeast. In Korea, the easiest thing to get is iodine. So you can get this at any pharmacy. The easiest way to make it is you mix, I think it's about 1 milligram of yeast, 1 milligram of iodine with 1 liter of water, and that makes a solution that will kill any bacteria. So you mix that around with your equipment, you put it into the fermenter, into the boiling kettle, and everything like that, and it will kill everything. Things that you ought to have is a thermometer. While you're making the beer, temperature is really important, especially with all grain. With extracts, it doesn't really matter too much. But with all grain, temperature is what decides what kind of beer you're making. So if you brew a beer at a very low temperature, or while you're malting or mashing the beer, if you do that at a very low temperature, you get a very high alcohol beer. If you mash it at a very high temperature, you get more of a low alcohol beer that's very sweet. The next one is a hydrometer. So this is just how you tell how much alcohol is in your beer. The way that you do this, a hydrometer measures the density of a liquid here, where it's kind of balancing in the water. When you first make the beer, before it is fermented out, you measure the density of the liquid. And the density just tells you how much sugar is dissolved in that liquid. Then you measure it again when when the yeast has changed all of the sugar into alcohol. And since alcohol is lighter than water, it pushes this up. When you take those two gravities, so the density the first time and the density the second time, that's how you can calculate how much alcohol the yeast actually made. A racking cane or a siphon is something that you can take the beer out of whatever fermenting vessel you had it in. Oftentimes, if you're brewing in a carboy, there's no way to get the beer out short of just dumping it, which is not something you want to do because all of the yeast that's on the bottom will kind of come out and be in suspension, and you don't want to drink that. This just makes it a lot easier. So you can keep the yeast on the bottom of the fermenting vessel, then it will stay stationary, but the beer will come out. A wort chiller is something that works by exchanging heat. So if you have this inside of your brew vessel at the end, while the wort is still hot after the boil, you can actually push cold water through the copper coils from your sink, and the cold water will pull heat through the copper out of the hot beer, and then the water will heat up, and then spit hot water out the other side. So it kind of works like there'd be hoses on each of these. So cold water would come in here, filter through all of that copper tubing, and when it comes back out, now it's hot. So it's taking all of the heat that's in the beer and pushing it out through the water. Someone on the Homebrew Korea forum, which is the community in Korea for homebrewing, made this set, which is under 100,000 won. He has a fermenter, so this is what he actually ferments the beer in. This is the brew kettle, so this is what he boils everything in. Here's the hydrometer, the capper, and then some different hoses, and you can see his siphon. So all of this is available. Most of it you kind of just get piecemeal from local markets and things. This big red guy, you can find them anywhere. That's what people used to make kimchi with. This thing is for fermenting fruit, I believe, to make maple jus or things like that. And this you can just find at any kitchen supply. The capper is a little bit more difficult to find, but as you move up and maybe want to make some more interesting beers, or you have a little bit more money to spend on this hobby, this is something that you can find. I believe this was from a European website. But this is a kit that's all together. So you can see there's 2 fermenters. There's the bottling bucket, the hydrometer, the capper, some sanitation things, and a big funnel. But a lot of times you can find cheap bundles of equipment. So you don't have to go out and find everything by yourself, which makes it a little bit easier. And then when you are really interested in homebrewing, or if you want to start making bigger capacity batches, there's some people that put their own things together, and this is obviously not something that you would want to brew with at the start. This is a custom-made thing that someone created. So these are just used kegs that he drilled holes in. It's a computer controlled system, and it does everything. You put the grain in the beginning, it boils everything automatically, and at the end you have beer. In some cases, the hoses automatically do everything. This little guy here, you put in the temperatures in the beginning at how you want to mash. You say how long you want it to ferment, and you pretty much press the button and it's done. This is similar, but on a much smaller scale to what professional breweries would have. So maybe Cass or Hite, or in the United States, Budweiser, or anything like that. They'd have something similar to this, albeit much, much larger. This is a beer that I made early on. So this is kind of a cost breakdown, and you can really see the difference between brewing in America or the UK versus brewing in Korea. So this was an oatmeal stout, and the recipe calls for 6 kilograms of malt, 2 ounces of hops, and I was making 28 liters of pretty standard 5% beer. So maybe it's a little bit higher than Cass, but about the same. In the United States, it would only cost $10 to get all of the malt, a little bit more than $10. In the UK, it's about comparable. In Korea, for these 2 things together, it's almost 45,000 won. This is because of taxes and VAT, different things like that. It's also just that in Korea, there's no what's called maltsters, so people who make the malt. In Europe and America, there are places who make malt, so it's not subject to tax and things like that. In Korea, everything has to be imported, and until recently, when the free trade agreements went through, all of this was subject to 280% tax. So it's starting to come down, and it will continue to come down. And even since I've been here and have started brewing, the price has gone down probably by half. So it will keep getting better as more people become interested. Hops are something that's really difficult to get here. So these are prices that are estimated. This is a shop that I use in America, so I know that this is correct. I couldn't find a good shop in the UK, so this is kind of just an estimate. As far as the ones in Korea, there is a shop that you can buy hops for 5,000 won an ounce, which is really cost prohibitive. So what a lot of people do, and what I did, is if I went back home for Christmas or traveled home at all or knew someone who was coming to Korea, I got them to buy me hops and take them with them to Korea, which makes it a lot easier and a lot cheaper. But you can still see that for a 500 milliliter bottle, it's only about 1,500 won to make a batch of nice beer. This is something that I made with a friend recently, and this is an Imperial IPA, so it's something really hoppy, something that you would kind of think of as a beer that you would really miss from the States or from the UK, something that you can't get here. So you can see there's a lot more malt, and also much more hops. So you can see that the price has gone up substantially, even for the US one and the UK one. So it kind of doubled in price. So it was $15 or 51,000 won, and it went to $32 or 108,000 won. And this is just for the materials to make it. So it's not for the equipment, it's not for anything else. This is only for the grain and the hops. Granted, this is a very strong beer, so it's 8% alcohol. It's not something that you'd want to drink a lot of, and this batch did last me for a long time. But it is also a little bit cost prohibitive, so it's not something that you would make all the time. However, to put it into perspective, so if you make a really nice IPA that you like, something that you really miss, and a recipe that you put your time into, something that you specialized, something that you kind of created on your own, it's still only 1800 won compared to Cass, which is not particularly good. And this is it's still much cheaper. So there's a bit of a time investment, but in the end, I think most people would say that it's worth it. And lastly, the community in Korea is, I think, the biggest benefit to brewing here. When I started, I knew absolutely nothing about brewing. I found out through Craigslist. I just did like a class. I didn't know anything. And then I found Homebrew Korea. And it's a group of really, really lovely guys and girls and all kinds of people, dogs. But it was started by a Canadian guy who got here in, I think, 2004. So he's only been going for like 6 or 7 years. And it started out really small. It was a group of 4 or 5 people. And today there's over 200 members. So we have events all the time, and most importantly, we have events probably, we try to have an event every month. It doesn't always work out. We try to have 2 major events every year, so contests where we can say, try to make your best X. So in one case it was a stout, in one case it was an IPA or a high gravity beer, something like that. This was when, after the Japan tsunami, somebody put something on the forum and said, I really think we should do something. We have something that is everybody wants and is a little bit difficult to get. So I think not everybody was pictured there. There was maybe 10 brewers who each made a batch or 2 of beer. And this was within a 2 or 3 week period. So everybody did it almost the next day. A month later, we had a fundraiser, and we ended up raising almost 700,000 won that we sent to the Red Cross in Japan. So it's a really, really nice group of people. Everybody's really willing to help out, and it's a really close-knit group. Recently, there's a little craft beer place that opened up in Seoul, and they had an event that was open to home brewers, and the contest was, you make the best beer that you can with this given set of ingredients that's available to them, and then the winner would have their beer put on the menu at this bar. So Bill Miller is one of the people from our group, and he won. So he made his beer recipe is now Bukansan Pale Ale at Craftworks in Seoul. Another really popular event that we had was called the Fermentation Celebration. So this is something that's a little bit outside of brewing, but in the same vein. So this was it last March? I think it was this March actually. One of the main things was beer. There was 4 or 5 different brewers there, as well as Homebrew Korea. So people who aren't part of the group. There was people who made kombucha, which is a sort of fermented tea. People made cheese. People made makgeolli. People made all kinds of different things. There was someone who made pickles. All kinds of things. It was a really, really great event. So I think the thing that's interesting about brewing and making things like this in Korea is, when I first started, I kind of felt alone. Like, this is something that's just not done here. It's something that doesn't happen. But there's a lot of people who are interested in making beer or learning more about it, or making, even if they're not making beer, making makgeolli or making yogurt or cheese, things like that are maybe difficult to get or maybe a little bit too expensive to have on a normal basis. So, but I believe that there's going to be another one of those coming up. And on the Homebrew Korea page, there's also a Facebook group, and they have lots of events and all the upcoming things they link to. So if you want to find out about those, you can join on there. So, thank you.